Hey y'all, this is Ash with Optics, and I will be covering the first season of the show of His Dark Materials with the comparison of the books. I will be primarily using the first two books, which will be discussed, which is a good majority that was used and given throughout the show. I will also be sticking with the show's order of episodes, and a lot will be covered, but of course not all of it. So if I miss anything, certainly feel free to mention in the comments below so we can further spaz together. Now let's jump right into the story and be mindful there will be spoilers. As always, whenever we get the idea of a show being compared with a book, we get a little concerned. Same with some movies that eventually come out if the book is really good. And for once, I was super happy to watch and be extremely thankful that for once this book was actually in the show. Now, we're never going to talk about the movie because we're going to put that definitely in our past as if it never happened. But this show has certainly happened, and I was so happy that I can finally say this show was just as good as the books. Now, there were some things that I was happy to see, and then there are other parts that I wasn't. Now, my favorite part in the very beginning of the books with Lyra and Roger, they're running through the catacombs. I was kind of sad that this didn't actually happen, just because you really got a feeling of where she came from, how close she was with Roger, and you really got their dimension together, and I really liked that. And I was kind of excited and hoping for that to kind of occur, but it didn't. But it was a little better than, once again, that horrible movie. But we did still get a good sense of it, and there was still some enjoyment when you were down there with the catacombs. Just didn't get the ghosts, but I was still really happy to see how close Lyra and Roger's dynamic really was. Other than that, the first episode I was really happy to see was pretty much spot on to the very beginning of the book with Lyra and Roger. As we kind of go on in the episodes, moving forward from the second episodes through 8, we start to see the Magisterium. I was kind of happy to see that because you don't really get a lot of information in the first and the second book about them too much. You just kind of know that they're there. But the magistrate is given a point of view at certain points, and I really liked that. But who you really get to see is the magistrate gentleman Boreal. He's able to travel between the worlds through a window, but it isn't exactly in the books until about the second part, about going from one world to another. But you get kind of a start and a glimpse into that. And I kind of liked how they were moving that direction to really set up for the second season and kind of lead into the second book. It really felt the pull. Because if you read the second book, it's a shocker, not gonna lie. Really thrown off. But I liked how they were giving, again, the magistrate a point of view. And as you go on, you really start to see a lot of Mrs. Coulter. You kind of get what she's like, but she has a lot of anger. And she, at one point, does tell Lyra about her father. And I was kind of okay with it, but I would prefer the way it was in the book, about the Egyptians telling her about her family. But other than that, I thought Mrs. Coulter was really cool and how she did tie in Boreal into her story at one point. Even going on to that, you kind of see how Mrs. Coulter is attached to her monkey, why her daemon is like her. She gets this weird, almost animalistic aspect of her as a monkey, and I thought that was really cool. But I did get kind of questions on she could really go long distances without her monkey. And that really freaked me out. But it also led some really cool questions that I think is going to be really cool to get answers from. Now, I also thought which was really cool was Mrs. Coulter did stick to meeting up with the children and having them write their letters. When I saw that, I was like, whoa, this girl is crazy. But I also saw that at one point she was kind of fighting in herself when she burns them, that this is her daughter. Like, this could be affecting Lyra. But she's also thinking of her future and the future happiness of all the children, where there's no more sin from the dust. I thought that was really cool. But let's now go into Lyra's story a little bit more. There was a scene in the book where Lyra is on the ship with the Egyptians. The Egyptians hide her, and then the boat is searched. I was so nerve-wracked during the book. It also kind of reminded me of, like, the Nazis, some of the books I used to read when I was a kid, and I thought that was so frightening. And then to actually see it in the show, I was like, whoa, mind is blown, still nerve-wracking, still super scary, and I was so excited that this was in this show. I thought this was the best part. And the only thing that kind of was concerning was after that part, the Egyptian boys leave the boat and go back for Mrs. Coulter's map and, like, information. I didn't really feel like that was obviously in the book, because it wasn't. But I felt like it was a good direction. I saw where they were trying to go. But I still felt it was a pretty good direction. I liked how they did it. And I thought it was pretty cool. And all in all, I really did like how everything was going forward on the show. Now, at this point, we're kind of halfway through the season. So that means we're going to be getting onto the islands of where Iorek is. And I was excited about that. And you also get Lee Scoresby, who, of course, is played by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I thought it was super awesome to have him singing a few lines in the very beginning to kind of lead into his story. I'm not gonna lie, I was super happy about that. And I really liked how you can see his dynamic of how he knows Iorek. And as you kind of go on, it's just as thrilling when you kind of get to see Lyra meeting him and going over everything and how they're going to get through everything and really move on together. I thought that was really cool. I wasn't super excited to have Lee Scoresby have a bar fight, but still, I thought that was a good direction. I kind of liked it. As you kind of go on, you start to notice that Serafina Pacula's bird, Kea, is actually the narrator of the story. You kind of notice the voice a little bit more as you go on, and I thought that was really, really cool. Now, because we are mid-season, Will, from the second book, starts to kind of trickle in from his second world with Boreal into this show. There was a lot of comparisons that I thought was great about it. The only thing that I thought was a little different was Will plays wrestling, not the piano. So he ends up being assisted by another gentleman, his teacher, who's the wrestling coach, other than the woman who is the teacher for the piano, who eventually does take care of the mother for him while he goes to escape to these other worlds. That was the only thing that I felt was a little different, and I was okay with still. That was the biggest thing I had an issue with, if I did have an issue with it, which I don't. Now, let's take a moment of this sadness when Billy Costa is finally found, and they find his soul is no longer with his daemon, Ratter. I cried in the book, I cried in the show. Let's take a moment. Also, when this scene happens, the puppies heard Pan making these sad and scared fox little whimpers. I'm not gonna lie, I was really sad. I can't get enough of how much I just cried on this moment. But so did the puppies. Our little babies, Axel and Shion, they heard it, and they were kind of crying with it. And that made it 10 times worse, people. 10 times worse. Now, as this show kind of comes to an end, we get where Lyra is finally in Bolvingar to save Roger. She is with Roger. So you kind of get to see her dynamic with her and Roger again and how happy they are to be together. Now, there were some changes that I was okay with, but a little thrown off by a little bit too. When Lyra gets caught, it isn't from the ceiling. She's just kind of asked to come forth because at that point she's becoming of too old of an age for her to then be basically sliced or intercision from her daemon. So they kind of want to use her as an example when Mrs. Coulter comes to visit. And that was a little odd. And then the other part is when Lyra is screaming for Mrs. Coulter to save her. That was a little different from the book as well, as I was okay with it, but I kind of felt like the dynamic and the information provided in the book was a little better. But I still wasn't not satisfied. Now, we're also going to kind of briefly touch on the bear fight between Iorek and Iorek. I thought it was interesting, but I was actually kind of more thrilled and enjoyed the movie's version of this scene compared to the show. Now, maybe I am kind of liking the thought that the movie hacked off his head, whereas the show just kind of gave Lyra's face instead of it. So, I don't know, I thought it was a good way of keeping it PG, but I kind of wanted it PG-13 on that moment, because at that point you're like, I don't like you, go away, I don't like this bear. Now at this point we are seeing more of Will, and I really liked that they did this because I felt like it was a great gradual explanation and moving forward for the second book to be also in the second season. At this point they're right next to each other, you kind of see how their times are lapsing together, and I thought that was really cool. The only other thing that I thought was really interesting too was Grumman had mentioned in the very last episode to have found the knife, and his son would find it in the tower. I was kind of thrown off by this, but I was actually really excited about this too. Now that the show is basically over and we're going to wait for the second season, I did have some questions. I found it really cool that the daemons are of the opposite sex of the human that they're with. So like Pan is a boy, but Lyra's a girl. And I'm noticing this dynamic from all the other characters with their daemons, and I thought, this is really interesting. I'm going to question this. Maybe we'll get an answer. Now, the ending was definitely completely different from the book, because Roger is dead. I was shocked, and I was kind of confused on how and why they ended it the way they did, because there was supposed to be fog, and Lyra gets lost in that fog, but that's not how it happened, and I'm curious to see how they're going to explain that in the second season. Like I said in the beginning, I am just touching on some key points and viewpoints of what I thought about the show versus the book. Now, what did you think of the show? Did you think it is just as good as the books? Obviously, we're always going to feel better that the books are always going to be better than the show or the movie, but I want to know your viewpoints. I also want to know what you have in regards to some mentions that maybe I haven't mentioned so far. If you have read the books, like I said, how would you compare them? If you could have a daemon, what would be yours? Let us know in the comments below. You can also comment and ask questions on Twitter and Instagram. See you next time.